Today in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
Today, just to tell the truth, so hopefully we can get down to the bottom of this. I'm 100%, the charges against me are 100% false, and hopefully due to time, we'll start to see that.
The courtroom was electric, buzzing with tension as Sean Diddy Combs sat stoic at the defense table, his sharp suit and carefully groomed appearance doing little to mask the storm brewing around him. This wasn't just another celebrity trial. This was the kind of scandal that could take down empires. The charges were nothing short of jaw-dropping, but the real fireworks began when Diddy's former bodyguard, a man who had once been the gatekeeper to his private world, took the stand and turned on him.
Because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
This wasn't an ordinary witness. This was someone who had been there, behind the velvet ropes, in the bulletproof SUVs, standing guard outside the gilded doors of Diddy's most exclusive and infamous gatherings. He had seen it all. And now he was ready to talk. But not out of the goodness of his heart. No, this was a man with his own legal troubles. A man willing to trade secrets for salvation. The prosecution had cut him a deal, dangling the promise of reduced charges in exchange for exposing the shadowy underbelly of Diddy's life. And expose it he did. The bodyguard's testimony was like a bomb going off in the courtroom. He spoke with a mix of reluctance and resolve, as though he knew the price of his words but also understood their power. He detailed events that sounded more like the plot of a gritty crime drama than the life of a music mogul. According to his account, Diddy wasn't just a star, he was the mastermind of a carefully orchestrated world where boundaries didn't exist, where power was absolute, and where loyalty was demanded at any cost. The bodyguard painted a picture of a man obsessed with control. He described how Diddy allegedly manipulated not just his inner circle, but anyone who crossed the threshold of his orbit, from lavish parties that felt more like secret rituals to the chilling way he kept tabs on those closest to him. The courtroom hung on every word as the bodyguard peeled back the layers of Diddy's carefully curated public persona.
The defense wanted to propose a question on, after the potential jurors filled out their questionnaire, have they seen any news media, any documentaries, anything just relating to a news medium, and whether or not they saw it in between them filling out the questionnaire to Monday morning when they saw, or when they go to jury selection.
But it wasn't just the events themselves that were shocking. It was the level of detail. The bodyguard described how he had been tasked with carrying out orders that at the time seemed bizarre, but in hindsight felt sinister. He spoke of being sent to retrieve items that were later used as leverage, of being asked to stand watch outside rooms where things happened that no one was supposed to talk about. He claimed there were moments when he wanted to walk away but didn't, out of fear, or perhaps out of the allure of staying close to the power and wealth that Diddy represented. If the defense hoped to poke holes in his credibility, they were going to have their work cut out for them. The bodyguard came armed with receipts. Not literal ones, but enough specifics to make the jury sit up and take notice. He described the layout of Diddy's homes in excruciating detail, down to the hidden compartments and the peculiar instructions he would receive about which areas were off limits to certain people. He claimed he had seen things that made him question his own morality, things he could no longer keep to himself.
Which again, the judge kind of made this a point too, talking about, okay, well, if we're going to continue to do sidebars each and every single time that a prospective juror has to talk about a sensitive topic, that could take up a lot of time. But again, the defense and the government both seem pretty confident that they'll still be able to kind of get it going at a quick pace. This isn't unusual to do in these types of high profile cases. So that was pretty much just the topics about, Ghislaine Maxwell.
And then there were the tapes. The bodyguard didn't just talk about them, he confirmed their existence. He alleged that Diddy had a habit of recording moments that were never meant to see the light of day. These weren't just home movies. These were the kind of recordings that could ruin lives, destroy careers, and, if the prosecution had their way, seal Diddy's fate. The bodyguard claimed he had been instructed to store and protect these recordings, though he insisted he had never watched them himself. But he knew what was on them, or at least he claimed to. The defense tried to push back, of course. They painted the bodyguard as a man with an axe to grind, someone who was willing to sell out his former employer to save his own skin. They questioned his motives, pointing out the deal he had struck with prosecutors. But the damage was done. The jury couldn't unhear what they had just heard, and the bodyguard's words hung heavy in the air.
In her civil lawsuit, Cassie said that she was the victim of abuse, assault, and at the hands of Diddy.
What made it all the more compelling was the way the bodyguard delivered his testimony. He wasn't theatrical or overly dramatic. He was measured, almost clinical. He spoke like a man who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time and was finally setting it down. Whether you believed him or not, there was no denying the weight of his words. He didn't just describe events, he transported the courtroom into Diddy's world, a world where power and excess blurred the lines between right and wrong. Then there was the moment that left everyone in the room holding their breath. When asked why he had stayed silent for so long, the bodyguard paused, his voice breaking ever so slightly as he admitted, "I was scared, not just for me, but for my family. You don't cross someone like him and walk away unscathed." It was a chilling statement, one that hinted at a darker, more menacing side to Diddy than anyone had publicly acknowledged before.
I want to mention one other quick thing. They can't find witness number 3 still. This
Yes.
is apparently an ex-girlfriend of Diddy's who was one of the alleged victims.
And
Prosecution can't find her.
Right, I heard.
But the bodyguard wasn't the only one who seemed to be wrestling with fear. The prosecution had already revealed that one of their key witnesses, referred to only as Victim 3, had gone missing. This was someone who, according to court documents, held explosive information that could have blown the case wide open. But now, she was nowhere to be found. The prosecution admitted they had tried to reach her, even her attorney, but it was like she had disappeared into thin air. The defense wasted no time jumping on this, arguing that her absence cast doubt on the credibility of the entire case.
Attorney is trying to find her, and her attorney has said that she may not be willing to come and testify anyway. So,
Be interesting.
Still, the bodyguard's testimony was a game changer. It lent credence to the allegations and gave the prosecution a much-needed boost after the setback of losing Victim 3. But it also raised more questions than it answered. If this was just the tip of the iceberg, what else was hiding beneath the surface? What other secrets were locked away in Diddy's sprawling empire, waiting to come to light? And perhaps most importantly, who else might be implicated if those secrets were ever fully revealed? The courtroom was left reeling, the air thick with tension and uncertainty. Everyone knew this was far from over. If anything, the bodyguard's testimony had only scratched the surface of a story that was growing darker and more twisted by the day. And as the trial continued, it became clear that the stakes were higher than anyone had initially imagined. And just like that, the courtroom wasn't just a battlefield, it was a circus, a high-stakes game where every move was calculated, every revelation more damning than the last. As the bodyguard's testimony rippled through the courtroom like an earthquake, the prosecution wasn't about to let the momentum falter. They leaned in, doubling down on their narrative of a man not just indulging in excess but orchestrating it, commanding it, weaponizing it. Yet, even as the prosecution built their case brick by brick, the defense was scrambling to contain the fallout from the missing witness, Victim 3. Her absence wasn't just a logistical nightmare. It was a gaping wound in the prosecution's argument, and Diddy's lawyers were ready to exploit it.
That they will be adding 2 defense attorneys. We only thought initially it was 1, but one thing that stood out to me when Mark Agnifilo was talking about this was he said that these defense attorneys are in the courtroom right now. I didn't see Mark Garagos in that courtroom, but what I did see is 2 defense attorneys that have been there when Brian Steele came on board, and those 2 defense attorneys were Nicole Westmoreland.
But let's not forget, this wasn't just about one missing witness. The shadow of Victim 3 loomed larger than her physical absence. Her testimony, had it been delivered, was set to be the linchpin of the prosecution's case, a first-hand account that could have cemented the pattern of behavior they were building against Diddy. The details of her story had been teased just enough to leave the courtroom buzzing with speculation. Why had she disappeared? Was it fear, intimidation, or something far more sinister? The prosecution, for all their confidence, seemed shaken, unsure if they could recover from this blow. And the defense? Oh, they pounced. They didn't just downplay her absence, they weaponized it. Diddy's attorneys painted a picture of a prosecution grasping at straws, of a case built on hearsay and half-truths. They argued that without Victim 3, the narrative of a decades-long reign of terror started to feel more like a story, patched together from unreliable sources and bitter ex-employees. They questioned the credibility of the other witnesses, calling them opportunists with axes to grind, eager to cash in on Diddy's downfall. It was a strategy as old as time: shift the blame, muddy the waters, sow doubt, and it was working. At least on the surface.
Or not really the judge. The government didn't go into too many details about the extent of the plea offer, but one thing that they had said was pretty much that under the plea offer, he would be facing less time than he's facing if he would have gone to trial. So when the allocution portion came, Diddy stood up. The judge kind of read him everything that he had needed to read to him, just about whether or not he was of sound mind, whether or not.
But behind the scenes, things were getting messy. Rumors swirled that victim 3 hadn't just vanished into thin air, she'd been silenced. Whether by fear, coercion, or something darker, no one could say for sure. What was clear, though, was that her absence was no coincidence. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. And it wasn't just the prosecution who was feeling the heat. Other witnesses, including some of Diddy's former associates, were reportedly growing skittish, reconsidering their willingness to testify. The whispers of intimidation tactics were impossible to ignore, and they cast a long, dark shadow over the entire trial. The prosecution wasn't just fighting Diddy's defense team, they were fighting the clock. Every day that passed without victim 3 was another day the defense could hammer home their argument that the case was crumbling. But what made matters worse was the way other potential witnesses began retreating into silence. One by one, names that had initially been floated as willing to testify started to vanish from the list. These weren't small players either. These were people who had worked inside Diddy's empire, who had been eyewitnesses to events now under scrutiny. Their sudden hesitancy wasn't just suspicious, it was a flashing neon sign that something or someone was pressuring them to back off.
As far as the plea offer that came up in the last hearing, where the government said we did offer him a deal or an offer, I should say, and that he rejected it. And now it's official, and he said it to the court as well, too. You know, he stood up, he said that he consulted with this about his attorneys, and it seems like they're planning, or not even seems like they're rolling the dice by going to.
And then there was the question of the private security firms. According to leaked court documents, Diddy had maintained contracts with at least 2 high-profile agencies known for handling sensitive matters for the ultra-wealthy. These weren't just bodyguards with earpieces. These were firms that specialized in crisis management, reputation control, and, according to some insiders, keeping certain people quiet. The prosecution hinted that they had subpoenaed records from these firms, hoping to uncover evidence of payouts or coordinated efforts to influence witnesses. But if those records existed, they hadn't been made public yet, leaving the courtroom and the public wondering just how far Diddy's reach truly extended. Meanwhile, whispers of international connections began to surface. Some of the alleged events tied to Diddy's case took place abroad, in locations where jurisdictional lines blurred and oversight was minimal. Former associates hinted at extravagant trips to private islands, where guests were carefully vetted and security ensured no one left with so much as a photograph. These trips, they claimed, were more than just vacations. They were strategic, designed to keep certain activities far away from prying eyes and local authorities. Whether these allegations would hold up in court was anyone's guess, but they added yet another layer of intrigue to an already convoluted case.
Jesse, we've been talking about this, just how confident the defense appears that, you know, they could get off on these charges. They could be acquitted, or possibly, you know, who knows what could happen, just because, again, you are rolling the dice. This really does feel like just kind of like, you know, just kind of like a gambling a little bit with Diddy's life in a sense, just because, you know, if you're offered maybe X amount of time versus this huge amount of time, which could be.
Meanwhile, Diddy sat in the courtroom, his expression unreadable, his demeanor carefully controlled. But let's be real, this was a man with everything to lose. His empire, his legacy, his freedom, it was all on the line. And while his legal team worked overtime to poke holes in the prosecution's case, the court of public opinion was already delivering its verdict. Social media was ablaze with theories, accusations, and debate. Some defended him, arguing that the allegations were exaggerated, a modern-day witch hunt against a powerful black man. Others were less forgiving, calling for accountability, for justice, for the truth to finally come to light. But the truth, as it often is in cases like this, was messy, because this wasn't just about Diddy. This was about the entire ecosystem that allowed him to thrive, to operate unchecked for so long. It was about the enablers, the yes men, the bystanders who turned a blind eye, or worse, actively participated in the alleged abuses. And it was about the victims, some of whom had waited years, even decades, to have their voices heard. The trial wasn't just a reckoning for Diddy. It was a reckoning for an industry that had long prioritized profit over accountability, image over integrity.
This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly.
And speaking of the industry, let's talk about the ripple effects, because as Diddy's trial unfolded, it wasn't just his name being dragged through the mud. Other celebrities, some of whom had been linked to him through business ventures, collaborations, or personal relationships, were suddenly finding themselves under scrutiny. Whispers of complicity, of participation, of knowledge without action began to surface. Some issued statements distancing themselves from Diddy, while others remained conspicuously silent. The tension was palpable, the fear almost tangible. No one wanted to be the next name on the prosecution's list. One name that kept coming up was Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend and one of the key witnesses for the prosecution. Her testimony was expected to be a bombshell, a detailed account of the alleged manipulation and abuse she endured during their relationship. But Cassie wasn't just a witness. She was a symbol. Her decision to speak out had inspired others to come forward, to share their own stories, to break the silence that had protected Diddy for so long. And yet, her involvement also made her a target. The defense wasted no opportunity to question her motives, to suggest that her testimony was driven by bitterness or a desire for revenge.
Not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking anything off the table.
No one wants him mentioned.
It was a brutal tactic, but an effective one. By casting doubt on Cassie's credibility, the defense hoped to undermine the broader narrative of abuse and coercion. And they weren't stopping there. They dug into the backgrounds of every witness, searching for inconsistencies, for skeletons in their closets, for anything that could be used to discredit them. It was a scorched earth strategy, and it was as ruthless as it was desperate. But for all their efforts, the defense couldn't ignore the elephant in the room: the tapes. The recordings, if they existed, were a ticking time bomb, a potential game changer that could blow the case wide open. The prosecution had hinted at their existence, but had been frustratingly vague about whether they would be introduced as evidence. The speculation was maddening, and the uncertainty only added to the tension in the courtroom. Were the tapes real? If so, what was on them? And perhaps most importantly, who had access to them now?
A US judge has ruled that the rapper and producer Sean Diddy Combs will stand trial on federal trafficking and racketeering charges in May. He'll be held in prison until then. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges that he used his business empire to transport women and male workers across state lines to take part in recorded performances. If convicted, he could face a life sentence.
The tapes were just one piece of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex by the day. There were whispers of financial records that could expose a web of payouts and hush money, of secret agreements designed to keep people quiet. There were claims of private detectives hired to uncover damaging information on possible complainants, of intimidations made late at night, of a web of influence that stretched well beyond Diddy's close associates. The more the prosecution uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a case. It was a saga, a sprawling, tangled web of power, corruption, and control. And yet, for all the drama, for all the revelations, there was a sense that the trial was only scratching the surface. The courtroom was just one battlefield. The real war was being fought in the shadows, in the conversations happening behind closed doors, in the deals being made under the table. Everyone had an angle, a stake, a reason to want this story to end a certain way. And as the trial continued, the question wasn't just whether Diddy would be found guilty. It was whether the full truth would ever come to light.
Now, to the latest on the arrest of Sean Diddy Combs. This one has so many people talking. The disgraced music mogul facing federal racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking charges. Both the prosecution and defense teams are set to discuss the next phase of action following the indictment, as investigators work to determine potential co-conspirators. But how exactly did we get here?
So, what do you think? Is this a moment of reckoning for Diddy and the industry that protected him, or are we watching yet another case of power and money bending the scales of justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's unpack this together. As always, stay tuned for more, because this story is far from over.